Hello and welcome back once again to Movie Reviews. So, second movie I got to see at the second run theater, third movie total for today, or as you would have seen them over the last 3 days now. Again, been out for a while, but finally got around to seeing it, and that is Pan, in case you couldn't tell by the title card that you looked at before you clicked on this video. So I got around to seeing Pan finally. I was kind of interested in seeing it because I've always kind of been a fan of the Peter Pan story, but when this one was announced, I was like, Pan's been so done. I've seen it like 900 different times, and do we really need another iteration just to reintroduce Pan to a new generation? Then I kind of took an interest in it because I heard it was going to be a different telling of the story, but at the same time, I've seen that done too. The BBC series did one not too long ago. There was like a 6-part miniseries or a season or series as they would call it over there, because they only do like 6 episodes per season, or what we would call a season in the U.S., but they call a series. So yeah, it's been done. I've seen different iterations of it. Honestly, the most original take I've seen on the Peter Pan story in a long time is when Robin Williams did Hook, and I've heard a lot of people come out recently saying that it was, as they look back at it from a nostalgic point of view, it's actually a horrible movie, but screw you, I like that movie, and it was awesome at the time, everyone loved it back then, and don't crap on it now. You know, it's like, yeah, it has its flaws, but it was still an awesome movie. We still quote it, everyone still thinks Rufio was cool. Yeah, just leave that movie alone. Leave Robin Williams alone. He was a good man. So this iteration of Pan, when I first read what the story was, I was kind of like, okay, so they're kind of going off the thing the BBC did. Which, the one that the BBC did was kind of where they kind of did an Oliver Twist type of thing with it, where Peter and the other Lost Boys were basically street urchins. Orphans and whatnot, and they got hooked up with this older guy named James Hook, who was kind of their, what was the guy's name in Oliver Twist? The Artful Dodger, the Jammy Dodger, whatever the hell his name was, the Dodger guy. So Hook was kind of their Dodger, and they end up in Neverland. I forget how they got there, but at first Hook and Peter are kind of like friends, and like Peter's his number one. It's like he's the one that he trusts the most with everything, but at the same time, even though he cares about Peter, he's still kind of using Peter because he's only interested in the money. All the Lost Boys kind of realize it, except Peter doesn't, because he thinks that they're friends. They end up in Neverland, they get separated, and Peter's trying to find him so that they can all get back home together, and at the same time, Hook was had gotten picked up by the pirates and was kind of selling everyone out to make money. And that's kind of how he became Captain Hook and how him and Peter became enemies. Which I thought was kind of an interesting retelling of it. And this one I thought was kind of going to go the same route when I saw that they had Peter and Hook and Blackbeard. And I was like, okay, so Blackbeard's going to be the main antagonist. Peter and Hook are going to be friends. And at some point, Hook is going to replace Blackbeard and become Captain Hook, and him and Peter will have a falling out or whatever. So I was like, okay, they're going to go the BBC route with it. Well, they sort of did, but they didn't. Actually, you could almost look at the BBC version almost being a sequel to this one, the way this one plays out, except the stories don't mesh right, and that's because they both kind of tell a backstory, which contradicts with itself. So this story, we start out with Peter we start out with Peter's mother leaving him at the orphanage, and her disappearing. Then Peter grows up in the orphanage, and they're kind of doing like an Annie type of thing, where, all the orphans are kind of friends and jumping around on the beds and everything, and they don't like the headmaster and whatnot. And I think it took place in World War I or World War II, one of the World Wars. I remember saying that. And it actually almost leads you to an interesting concept, but they they didn't linger on it long enough for you to actually think that that's where it was going, and I'll get to that shortly. They're in the orphanage, and each day some of the orphans are disappearing. They lose like anywhere from 2 to 5 of them a night. They just wake up and they're gone. And at one point, like, all the food is starting to get rationed out, and Peter's like, what's going on? And, where's all the food? And they're like, well, there's a war going on. We have to ration in case something happens. So he kind of has this theory that the headmaster is hoarding food and eating it all herself because she's old and ugly and fat. And so him and his buddy decide that they're going to go investigate. And they happen to go investigate right when there's an air raid drill going on, and like bombs are falling on the orphanage, and they're like, oh, let's go exploring. And it's like at one point they run back into the headmaster, and like this bomb goes off literally like right next to her, so you just see this big explosion behind her like she's this demon stepping out of hellfire. But at the same time, if that explosion went off, it would have knocked her on her ass and probably killed her. But it was a nice visual, I'll give it that. So they're investigating the headmaster's office, and they get found out. And they're back in their room sleeping. They're like, okay, well, we found this box of gold, so maybe the headmaster is selling orphans, and that's why everyone keeps disappearing. So they're going to stay up and find out how, like who's coming and getting the guys and where they're going and all this stuff. And they're like, we're gonna get to the bottom of this. So they're sitting there for a while. They start to get tired. They're like, this was a dumb idea. Let's just go to sleep. So as soon as they lay down, apparently this was the night that the headmaster said, take everyone. Because every damn kid starts getting picked up by these pirates. So the pirates came in on an airship, and they bungee corded in through the ceiling and would take kids. And at this one night when Peter's actually awake and paying attention to what's going on, every damn kid in the orphanage gets taken this night. It's not just 2 or 3 here or there. It's like, let's load up the entire ship and get the hell out of here. So they end up in Neverland, where, considering it was World War II time, I want to say, World War I, World War II, one of them, they arrive in Neverland, and all the other orphan slaves that have been taken over the years and all the other pirates and everything are singing this welcoming song, when you hear pirates sing and they're all in unison and it's got that haunting chant sound. Well, that's what you're hearing through this, is all these people kind of chanting together. And then you realize what they're singing is Nirvana's Smell Like Teen Spirit. Which I was like, okay, considering this is like World War II time, how the hell would they even know that song? But yeah, it's like, hello, 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 all that stuff. So it's like welcoming the new arrivals. And it's like, they do this whole kind of little musical number. And it's like, as much as that song doesn't fit, it was kind of cool. It was an interesting take on doing that. They do it again later with, Blitzkrieg Bop? It's like later on in the movie, some stuff happens, and there's another thing that Captain Blackbeard has to do, and they start singing Blitzkrieg Bop around that one. So, like, they keep using these modern songs. I thought this was going to be like a recurring thing through the whole film. No, it's just those two. I think they did like one other one, but it wasn't that impactful like these two were. It didn't really stand out as much. So anyway, Peter arrives in Neverland, and he's the guest of Captain Blackbeard, who's like, all we want you to do is mine the mines, and then, if you do a good job, you'll be rewarded. If you don't do a good job, there'll be punishment. So Peter finds what they're looking for, and he's kind of like holding it, and this other guy that's been there longer kind of takes it from him, one of the pirates. He's like, look, I found it. And Peter's like, no, I found it. So there's this little rabble-rousing type of thing, and it turns out that they decide that Peter's guilty, so he's the one who has to walk the plank. And that's when they start singing Blitzkrieg Bop. And this is when Peter finds out he can fly. He doesn't know how he flew, but he flies. And it's basically just because when he walked the plank, he was about to smack into the ground, and he just kind of floated. So then Blackbeard takes him into his little office on the ship, and he's like, there's this prophecy of this boy who's a half-breed. He's half human, half fairy. And he's supposed to be the one who ends my life. And, he goes, are you that boy Peter? And Peter's like, no, I don't have any intention of killing you. He's like, I didn't even know I could fly until today. So they're kind of having their back and forth. And Blackbeard's like, okay, well, go back to your cell, and has him take it back to the cell. Peter had already met Hook at this point. Hook was another orphan slave who had been there forever, I guess, because he's now like 30, even though you're not supposed to age in Neverland. But actually, that's kind of like, that kind of fits into Blackbeard's whole issue, which I won't go into just yet. But it's like the never aging thing of Neverland isn't in play at this point. That must be something that comes later on, like in the next sequel. So Hook has been there for a while. He's like in his 20s or so. And he talks to Peter. He's like, hey, can you do that flying thing again? Peter goes, yeah, sure, why? He's like, well, I have this escape plan, and it's going to happen in like 30 seconds, and I need you to help me fly. So Peter's like, okay, I'll help you fly if you help me find my mother. Because then he finally realizes that his mother is somewhere in Neverland. Which, there's this long story about how he figures that out, but, it plays into it where he's like, if you help me find my mother, I'll help you. So they're like, yeah, okay, sure. Early at this point, we also met Smee. So he kind of tags along with Hook and Peter. And they escape, and Hook's idea is to hijack one of the airships and use it to fly back to Earth, I guess. But then as they get onto the airship, Peter's like, we're not going anywhere. You promised you'd help me find my mother. And he goes, well, how are we supposed to do that? He goes, we have to find the tribes that Blackbeard is afraid of, because they'll know where my mother is. So they finally seek out the tribe. They find the tribe, surprisingly. Surprisingly easily, too, considering Blackbeard says he's scoured the entire island and can't find them. Yeah, apparently Neverland is just this one giant island. So they find the tribe, which traditionally was an Indian tribe or a Native American type of tribe. In this, they're a tribe, but they're all white people. Actually, no, some of them were black, but there's like no like traditional Indians. There was like one Filipino or Asian or something who was their warrior. Then the main chief and Tiger Lily and all of them were all white, and then like some of the sub characters were black, but they're all like wearing like traditional like makeup, like they stereotypical Indian makeup. Actually, it's not really Native American Indian either. It's more like the African tribal makeup, like the Aboriginal makeup. If you think back to like Crocodile Dundee, if any of you kids know what that is. So yeah, they kind of got that, but they're all like white people, so it's kind of odd looking. So then we get introduced to Tiger Lily, who I remember in the story only being slightly older than Peter, because if I remember right, her and Peter were kind of a love interest at one point. And then he ended up meeting Wendy, and then they decided they were just friends. I don't know. But Tiger Lily is actually around 20-ish, so she's around the same age as Hook. And of course she has to be, because her and Hook have this little flirtation going back and forth where they become each other's love interest. And, it's kind of like they're trying to do the Han Solo and Princess Leia thing where, obviously we like each other, but you're a scoundrel and you don't care about anyone but yourself, and, I'm trying to do what's right by my people type of thing. And they're trying to play that whole thing up, and they just do it so oddly that it almost doesn't fit, but at the same time, it's kind of playful and fun in a way. Mostly because, like, the way she treats Hook. Like, at one point, she just, like, he's just basically flirting with her, not really saying anything inappropriate. And then just, like, out of nowhere, she slaps him across the face and turns around and walks away like she's pissed. And then as soon as she has her back to him, she starts smiling like she's, like, oh, goo goo gaga, or whatever he said. Yeah, so, of course, Tiger Lily is his love interest. Then they find out that Peter might be the chosen one. So they're like, well, you have 3 days, and then you'll have to fly and prove that you're who you say you are. So Peter keeps trying to fly, and keeps trying to fly, and keeps trying to fly. He can't fly. He can't remember how he did it. So then Blackbeard shows up, because he followed Peter. And he takes he takes the tribe hostage. And like there's a little rebellion at first, and there's some executions. And the funny thing is, I know it's Neverland, it's supposed to be a kids movie, so you're not supposed to represent death. But basically, every time Hook or one of the other pirates shoots one of the tribal members, they just explode into this cloud of color. It's like poof, and it's just like all this blue smoke or pink smoke or red smoke, and it's like, okay, I can understand if like the colored smoke was coming out of the end of the guns because they're like the older musket barrel loader type of thing, so those always had like a puff of smoke that came out of them. So if you're doing like different colors of smoke coming out of that, but no, like these people just disintegrate, like their bodies, they get shot and their bodies just pop like a balloon, and it's just smoke. And yeah, it's just kind of odd because no one actually dies, but they die. So Hook ends up betraying the tribe, and like he's trying to explain to Tiger Lily, it's because I couldn't stand to see you die, or, you know, it's like I didn't want to see you die, and she's like, well, you could have closed your eyes, you know, you betrayed us, blah, blah. So it's like their little love back and forth, like she understands why he did it, but at the same time she's pissed that he did it. So Peter and Hook and Tiger Lily all manage to escape, and they're trying to seek out the fairy kingdom to warn them that Blackbeard is coming, and in turn end up leading Blackbeard right to the fairy kingdom. So then Peter finally learns to fly, and he calls upon the fairies who he can communicate with because he's part fairy. It explains his backstory, like his mother and his father and all that, and why they had to abandon him at the orphanage and all that. So he, unlike traditional stories of Peter Pan where he doesn't know anything about his past, he actually learns his past here. But at the same time, and they do hint at that in the Robin Williams Hook version, because they say that Neverland makes you forget things, because once Robin Williams remembers that he is Peter Pan, he becomes Peter Pan again and completely forgets why he was there, forgot his kids and all that, or that he was even an adult. So I can kind of see where he might forget it later, but he does find out his past, he finds out who he is, why he is, and he's now the leader of the fairies, I guess. So now that he's the leader of the fairies, he tells the fairies, you know, you have to fight or you're going to be destroyed. So they all rally around him and start fighting all the pirates and end up destroying Blackbeard. So then the war's kind of over, and him and Hook are still friends at this point. Tiger Lily is still a romantic interest at this point. Hook gets his airship, and they go back to Earth because Peter's main friend got left behind because he actually was smart enough to jump off the ship, and Peter was too afraid to jump because he's afraid of heights. So he's like, I gotta go back and get him. And he goes back, and surprisingly, the orphanage is entirely full of kids. It's like him and like 95 other kids in this orphanage, which makes no sense because every orphan was taken out of the orphanage when Peter was taken, except for the one that jumped off the ship. So he realistically should have been there by himself, but he wasn't. So then Peter's like, you know, all of you can come with me. So they all get on the ship and they fly back to Neverland, and there's this little joke where Peter and Hook are like, Peter's like, hey Hook, we're going to be friends forever, right? And Hook goes, yeah, sure, what could possibly go wrong? You know, so it ends with them still being friends, but at the same time, it leads up to there's more to come. So it's kind of a cute little origin story in the long run. The thing I was talking about earlier, what they could have done with this and made it a lot more interesting, but they didn't because it's a kids movie. It hints that Peter died. So, like, as he's snooping around and the bombs are going off and everything, like I said, that one where the bomb explodes right next to the headmaster, it kind of implies that Peter and Nips and all the other orphans died right then, or at least Peter and Nips did, because that was his other friend that was running around with him that jumped off the ship and was left behind. It almost implies that just because they weren't in the bomb shelter with all the other kids, they were killed. And that's what Neverland is, because even though it shows that they lived through it, once he ends up in Neverland and he's having a little confrontation, or he's having his little conversation with Captain Blackbeard, Blackbeard's like, do you know what Neverland is? And he's talking about Neverland is when you go to sleep and you can't wake up. He's like, have you ever had a dream that's so intense, it becomes like a nightmare, and it gets to the point where you're dreaming, but your body can't wake up, and you're basically drowning in sleep. And he said that's what Neverland is, when you go to sleep and you never wake up. And he even says at one point, Neverland is death. So, but then, like, they don't mention it again after that. And I just thought that was, like, the way they first started out the movie and then going into Neverland, that's originally what I thought was, did Peter just die and Neverland's just, like, his afterlife? And, like, then they were kind of like, no, he survived it. And then Captain Blackbeard says that, and I'm like, oh, wow, that's, like, pretty deep concept there, like Neverland is Peter's afterlife. But I guess they kind of had to stray away from that, because then how would he come back later into the real world and take Wendy and her brothers could have died, and that's why he took Wendy, but then Wendy supposedly comes back and raises a family. So I don't know. It's like, yeah, it could be that Peter's just the guardian of the children who die, because they're the lost children, or the lost boys. And it's because they died at a young age, so he's like their guardian, and he like guides them through the afterlife, which is Neverland. I mean, it's a really dark but yet interesting concept that they could have explored, but because it's a PG kids movie, they had to stick with, nah, he's fine. But like I said, in a more adult version, like like a 80s Tim Burton version, I could see them definitely going that route, and it could have been very interesting. But at the same time, it played out the way it did. So that's more or less Pan. What would I give it on a star rating? Well, it wasn't really a Pan movie. It was just kind of padded out with a lot of nonsense. It did change some of the continuity. Some of it for the better, some of it for the worse. Like I said, there was that very interesting dark moment there where I was like, oh, this could actually turn out to be a lot better than I thought it was. Even one guy, like when I was leaving the theater, goes, wow, I thought that was going to be crap, and I actually kind of enjoyed it. And I just kind of laughed because I was kind of in the same boat. Like when I went into it, I was like, I could have saw it here at the theater several times, and I kept putting it off and putting it off and putting it off until finally it wasn't there. And it was because as much as I like the Peter Pan stories, this one just didn't drag me in. For something about the previews just was like, it's just, I don't need to see this. As much as I like Peter Pan and want to see it, I don't need to see it. And then after I saw it, I kind of felt the same way, like, well, it was better than I thought it was going to be. Still, that doesn't make it necessarily great. Like I said, had they gone that darker route, it could have been an insanely awesome movie. But really, how do you go forward with that other than that brief explanation that they gave? Because they got to keep it lighthearted and friendly and colorful. And yeah, Peter Pan could actually be a very dark frickin' story if you really think about it. So, what would I give it on a star rating? I'm going to say, I hate to give everything a middle of the road, but really, like, nothing has really stood out. Like, yeah, this is a great movie. Again, I'm going to have to give it a 3. It's just kind of, I kind of want to knock it down because it was an unnecessary movie, but at the same time, like I said, I ended up enjoying it more than I thought I would. So I don't really want to knock it down to a 2.5. So yeah, I'm just going to give it, it's an average movie. It's a middle of the road. It's a 3. Not much more else to say about it other than that. I mean, like I said, the musical numbers with Nirvana and Blitzkrieg Bop was kind of cool, especially considering it was like World War II times and those songs didn't exist. Had they gone that darker tone with it, it could have been interesting. I do like that they ended it with them still being friends, so it left it open for the sequel, because by the end of the 6-part miniseries that the BBC did, Hook became Hook. It's like he went from being James Hook to being Captain Hook. And in this one, he gets the name Captain Hook, but he still has his hand. Like, they tease the crocodile thing quite a bit. Like, at one point, he's, like, dipping his hand in the water as they're floating down the river. And he's like, well, what could possibly be scary in these waters? And she says, crocodiles. And he, like, quickly pulls his hand out. And then, like, another time, the crocodile's circling around the boat, and Peter falls off. And Hook, like, reaches his arm down in to try and grab Peter. So you keep expecting it to happen, but it doesn't. And spoilers there, because it doesn't end up happening. He keeps his hand through the whole thing. But it's like, every time he plunges his hand into the water, you keep thinking, this is it. This is where he loses his hand and becomes Hook. And nope, never happens. Yeah, so I kind of like the way they went about it, but at the same time, like I said, it wasn't really needed other than to introduce Pan to a new generation, but at the same time, this isn't introducing Pan as Pan is. It's introducing a new Pan. So really, it doesn't really matter that you're introducing it to a new generation. You could have really called this anything and just gone with a basic story and introduced new characters that have similarities to Peter Pan. Anyway, this is getting kind of long. Like I said, it's the middle of the road. It's a 3. So I do got one more that I saw. I'll get to that momentarily. But that is it for this one. So again, as always, thanks for watching. Remember to like, comment, rate, subscribe, and all that other fun stuff that's all around the screen. And until next time, we'll see you at the movies.